will the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act be dead by this administration? There seems to be no appetite to enforce it. I have a spirited answer to that question, but before I get on my soapbox, let me ask both of you what you think of that. And Lisa Beth, I'll put it to you first. What would you say to that view? Because that view is not uncommon. But what would you say?
So personally, I don't think that FCPA is going to be dead. Whether it's going to have as much attention as it has in the past is up for debate. What I'm seeing, though, throughout every aspect of compliance is that there are more and more old rules that are being used to tackle new problems. So I would not be surprised if we see FCPA deployed differently, perhaps more towards areas where there are sanctions or where sanctions aren't as clear and the government wants to make a point. So I think that particular rule, I don't think that's set on arrival. We know that FCPA is very, very important for integrity of markets and a whole host of other things. And so I think it'll just be deployed differently. Still there, still something to watch, but it may not take up as much airspace as it has in the past.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily uncommon if you look back at our industry for the last 20 years. There always seems to be some topic that everybody's focused on. A few years ago, everyone was focused on ESG, and that was every single webinar was all about ESG. And then everyone's focused on privacy. And so there's a natural focus change that I think has happened and that will likely happen again. But to Lisa Beth's point, I absolutely agree. I don't think it's going to go away. They're not going to delete the FCPA or anything like that. But the areas of focus may change a little bit.
I do think that, yes, the areas of focus may change, but okay, now I'm up on my soapbox for 60
Get
seconds.
on there, Matt. We love you on a soapbox.
Do it.
This is exactly what we said 8 years ago, that there'd be no FCPA enforcement in the first Trump term. And I can think of multiple FCPA enforcement actions in his term and compliance officers who went through it, and they would beg to differ with the premise because it wasn't dead for them. Number two, we should remember the statute of limitations for FCPA violations does extend beyond the 4 years that President Trump served. And there may be a different administration with a different attitude in 2029. And if you didn't have a compliance program now, that will be a painful conversation at some possible future where they are enforcing it. And then the other thing that strikes me is a lot of what you have to do for good FCPA enforcement is so valuable for corruption risks generally. And so here in Boston, we had a case in the courts. Takeda Pharmaceuticals found that one of its employees was running an embezzlement scheme where she set up a fake vendor with her then boyfriend, and they built the company for about $2.5 million over the course of several years. Really, the only difference between what she did and an FCPA scheme was that the boyfriend lived in Boston. And if he had been a foreign government official, that would have been an FCPA violation. Everything about that case, all of the materials, controls, policies you would need to catch it, the muscle memory for it, it's the same, whether it's FCPA or internal fraud. So in many ways, I would argue that a good anti-corruption program is going to help the company across a range of issues. FCPA is a big one, but even if that is on the back burner, there's going to be a whole lot of other problems that slide onto the front burner. You have to put them out the same way. And I don't know if either of you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. The FCPA came out in response to a problem. And to your point, whether the FCPA existed or didn't exist, we would probably, as operators of businesses, want to have controls in place to avoid fraud and corruption, right? I mean, that's normal. So I think to your exact point, the existence of the regulation at some level is irrelevant relative to the application of the controls in order to prevent this, this thing that the regulation is meant to prevent. So again, we were talking on a recent episode about we we shouldn't be trying, just like we don't want our people to just follow the letter of a policy. We want them to be, apply ethical, independent thinking, around the spirit of the law. We need to have that same view with these regulations. We shouldn't just be trying to like appease a regulator. We should be trying to solve this for ourselves. We should try to solve the corruption problem or the fraud problem within our organization for ourselves. And I think 9 times out of 10, probably 99 out of 100, we will end up complying with that regulation, assuming that is, this might be a leap, but assuming that that's logically written.
Well, and I will just add 2 cents in here because I can't help myself. Number one, the FCPA is based on foreign corrupt practices. So there's more than one country involved in here. So whether it's the United States or, some other country, there are anti-corruption laws in most jurisdictions in the world. So even if the FCPA just suddenly evaporated, like there are all these other anti-corruption rules. And frankly, there are even interstate commerce rules that make sure that if there is some type of fraud or corruption, there is a responsive regulation that's not FCPA because it's within the United States. So I think there's a lot of other things at play, and whether one particular rule is used more than another, that can shift. But the ultimate outcome, everyone wants business that works and that's on fair grounds because that's good business.
I would just add that the FCPA is really just the legal manifestation of corruption risk. And it kind of gets back to what we discussed. Are you a compliance officer? Are you a risk advisor? Are you both? The corruption risk is there. And, if you said, well, we have no FCPA worries anymore, but we have no idea if employees are embezzling us blind, I don't think your situation would improve with senior management if you actually just said that out loud. A lot of it is about what's the fundamental risk? How do we guard against it? And by the way, a lot of that actually looks a lot like an ethics and compliance program for the FCPA or the Bribery Act or anything else.